Chapter 19. Sunday, the 4th of July 2010, 7:23 a.m., Riverport, Massachusetts. Beth drove, her notebook propped on the dash, her phone nestled in the crook of her shoulder. "I'd like to report a suspicious vehicle. Bannerman's Overlook. I heard gunshots, and then a black town car tore right past me. Well, I believe I saw bullet holes in it." "Yes, ma'am." "As a matter of fact, I did, yes." "Do you have a pen?" Beth rattled off the license plate of Attleboro Town car and then hung up before the operator could ask for her details. I could murder for a frozen lemonade and a stuffy. It's 7 a.m. for Christ's sake. Can't get him in future report. If your cash was printed after 2010, it's effectively counterfeit. It's 2010, they don't check. What we're doing is heading back to my place, sanitizing it, and then we're going back to 2016. Beth, we're cleared. Let me take one last look around, enjoy it. This might be novel for you, kiddo, but I'm done. The woods embraced the Joyce family home, the eastern fence line being the only side open to the world. Beth drove into the southern perimeter, the side facing away from Riverport. The mesh fence on that side has a section that could be pulled aside. She drove the car through the gap, swept the grass up right behind her, and rolled the mesh back into place, clipping it shut. There was a dip in the land into which she nestled the car, and a mess of camouflage netting that she threw over the top. "Come on, this way." This was all Joyce land. Back in '99, she had identified the best place for her to build a place to live while still being able to keep an eye on the house. A spot deep in the woods, but on enough of a rise that she can get a good view of the property and close enough that she could get there in a minute or two at a dead run. A few trees had been felled strategically, and she limited her construction hours to when young Jack wasn't home. "Welcome to where the magic happens." At first glance, he didn't know what Beth meant. Then he realized he was looking at a shelter so well camouflaged it was almost invisible against the side of the wall outcrop against which it was built. The shelter had a wide but narrow frontage made out of pine logs, wattle, and daub. Beth flipped the latch and pulled over a handmade door camouflaged with greenery, scraping up earth and needles as it opened. The interior was beautiful, dug into the side of the hill. The room was about 30 feet long, paved with stones that had been carefully selected for the flatness. The left wall had a long bench before a window that ran the full length of the room. Beth propped the window upward and opened a length of timber. Against the right wall was a raised stone shelf, insulated with foam matting, atop which was her bed, a good mattress, thick with covers. She had fashioned a simple four-cornered frame that she could drape mosquito netting over for the summer months. "Paul and I used to play here," he said. "Well, never came in. We were scared shitless." "The witch in the woods," she said. "I know. You two weren't as quiet as he thought you were." "Will warned me off. Ground me once because I wouldn't stop poking around there." His chest ached. "The whole time it was you?" The sight of her bed and earthy floral sense of the place had made his heart hurt. How many thousands of nights had she lain down here, waiting to catch up to the future? What had life meant for her here day after day? "Come on," she said. "I need this place stripped and burned. Tools and such in the drawer under the bed." Beth opened the door on the right and stepped inside. He heard gear being moved around. A long recess was dug into the wall, home to books, a glass of water, candles. The walls were wooden in all size. Jack noticed electricity outlets, a space heater, and against the far wall was a simple fireplace and opening. A couple of colorful rugs lined the floor. A broom by the door. On the right wall, adjacent to the fireplace, was a door, leading farther into the earth. Through the now open window hatch on his left, he had a panoramic view of the woods, sloping downward toward the south side of the house. Greenhouse, garage, barn. He wondered if Will was there now. Crouching by the bed, he lifted the soft floral covers, finding the large drawer built into the base of the shelf. Inside, a red metal tool chest, which he hefted out. Something hanging from the bed frame caught his eye as he prepared to lift the chest into the bench behind him. Hanging from the canopy above the pillow was a silver bullet on a long, thin chain. Leaving the toolkit on the rug, Jack stood up and cupped the bullet in one hand. She had inscribed it with a collection of scratches, 2 sets of vertical strokes and 1 cross stroke, and 1 single vertical stroke. 11, marking off the years as she did her time here. He rotated the bullet. She had inscribed the casing again, beneath the marks with a single word: trouble. I borrowed a metal detector. She was standing by the fireplace with a gym bag in one hand. You weren't supposed to see that. He didn't know if he was feeling joy or grief. Why not? Because it'll make what happens next harder than it needs to be. She put the bag down, crossed the room, and took the bullet from him, unlooping it from the frame. It had been quick work to dismantle her home. All of the wood, rugs, curtains, netting, sacking, anything flammable they piled into a nearby clearing. Jack doused the collection in gasoline. Beth touched the match. As they watched it burn, she reached and took his hand in hers. Is this what you did the first time? In 2010? He asked. First rule of a good disappearance, she said. Zed's burning her gear right now at her place, which your past self will discover in about an hour. Why didn't you want me to see the bullet? She looked him in the eye. When I was Zed, I never saw my future self after today, so means everything goes to plan. We get the countermeasure and leave. Maybe, but we need your head squarely in the game. The countermeasure makes it to 2016. Nothing else matters. Not to me. Jack, knowing you changed my life. You showed me what life could be, that I could change things. I loved you for that. He shrugged. Take that away, then that's when nothing matters. Sunday, 4th of July 2010, 10:10 a.m., Riverport Dockyard. Are you sure this is all just playing safe? Jack wore Kevlar beneath his shirt and jacket, a 2016-era Monarch issued assault carbine slung from his shoulder. Beth was decked out in paramilitary, also Monarch issued. A tanked shipbuilding industry meant 2010 prices for dockside real estate were mighty low. That's how Will was able to buy and outfit a workshop for himself away from the house and without Jack's knowledge. Jack and Beth were 2 doors down from that workshop. Parked between 2 large warehouses, Jack, in the heart of his past self, tear up his motorcycle, throw open the workshop door, and immediately start shouting at Will. Accusations of stupidity, irresponsibility, neglect, theft. This was happening in the hour before Jack found Zed gone and pointed his motorcycle toward the nearest Greyhound station. In the futile hope of finding her again, the beginning of a meandering 4 years quest for answers. Now Beth was beside him, leaning against the cooling hood of the car with a carbine in her hand, waiting for the final moments of that quest to run out. Jack could hear his brother feebly defending himself, caught red-handed, surrounded by everything family money had bought. There came sounds of violence. Jack remembered picking up a chair, smashing it into whatever he could find. Will shouting, "No! No! No!" He remembered an object that Will had made, a geometric sphere about the size of a volleyball. Something at the workshop told Jack that this was what all that money had gone into. So he had taken to it with the chair, smashed it, once, twice. "Stop! You're killing the universe! Stop! Stop!" Jack's nails bit into his palms. That was the moment his past self had punched Will in the face. Will's dumbfounded expression, baffled, hurt, childlike, stayed with Jack for years, and then Jack left. Jack and Beth heard the motorcycle kick to life. Seconds later, Jack's past self roared past the alley in which they were parked, heading to Zed's place. "Wait!" Jack said. Beth stopped, threw a questioning look. Will called Jack's name, heartbroken. Then the sound of a car starting, and Jack caught a glimpse of his brother as he drove past. That would be the last time he would see Will alive. "You okay?" He wasn't ready to say anything. He just needed a second. "Remember what I showed you by the river? With the revolver? I couldn't die because it wasn't my time. And you couldn't have said anything to Will that would have..." "Enough," Jack said. Let's go." The warehouse was no small affair. 2 stories tall and 3 times the size of the family home. Beth had a key for the front door and pulled the 10-foot-high rolling mass of steel aside. It led into a smaller anteroom with a security door. Beth punched in the code, and the lock popped,
My birth date?
Afraid so. Jesus, Will, security. They moved inside. They took no more than a few steps before having to stop. The majesty of Will's workshop made Jack believe in his brother's genius in much the same way that the Notre Dame in Paris had made 12th century peasants believe in God. Vast and complex. Everything with a purpose. The workshop was meticulously ordered warren of raw technology. Jack appreciated the inner workings of the place as much as he could, the inner workings of a person. The incomprehensibility was unsettling as it was astounding. Above and around, wonder. At his feet, a spray of smaller items scattered across the floor. The smashed body of a laptop, evidence of the furious violence Jack remembered inflicting. Directly in front of them was a glass chamber. 30 feet aside, atop a 3-foot-high square platform beneath which was buried a jumble of heavy-duty technology. A canopy of wires and cabling attached to the transparent box to scaffolding that housed 2 floors of unidentifiable machinery. The door to the box was slid aside. Inside at the center of the glassed-in space was a spindly stainless steel dais. Delicate upraised pincers, designed to support something delicately and precisely, held nothing. On the floor next to the dais was a chair Jack remembered using to knock a geometric sphere from the grip of those claws. He walked around the box, checking it out from all angles. Beth trailed along behind, glancing at her watch. The sphere, the countermeasure, lay on the room's insulated floor. A couple of its faces were now highly deformed. An access panel had divorced itself from the housing. Beth got to close the glass. Oh, Christ! I didn't know what it was then. What is it? It contains a self-replenishing chronon charge, powerful enough to brute force the MJ field back into shape. Jack eyed the bent panels. And what if it breaks open? Beth glanced at him. Then an infinite number of your alternate selves cease to get along. She straightened. Rechecked her watch. Catastrophically! She glanced at the device lying battered on the floor of the glass chamber. Something changed in her suddenly. Jack watched the tension drain from her. Urgency fading. Beth. Dr. Kim was credited with creating a self-replenishing source of power that was intended to be the heart of the Project Lifeboat, Beth mumbled. The regulator. Jack looked back at the chamber, skin flushing cold. Kim didn't create the regulator, Jack. Will did. This is it. The countermeasure and the regulator are the same thing. Something heavy thudded in the far wall. The security door had been deactivated. The countermeasure doesn't go missing because we steal it, Jack. It goes missing because they do. Jack grabbed her sleeve and pulled her behind the scaffolding that ran north-south between the box and the small eastern side office. 2 people, a man and a woman, entered. The guy carrying a rubberized gym bag. With a finger on one ear, the woman said, "We're inside." Her counterpart muttered, "Oh no," and moved to open the door of the box.
Looks like the device has been damaged, actual.
Beth glanced at Jack and closed her eyes in despair. Monarch.
We can stop this, he whispered to her. She shook her head, frustration turning to fury. You can't change the past, she hissed softly. It's a fucking impossibility. We've lost. Looking through the gaps of the scaffolding, through bundles of wiring, Jack could tell the 2 intruders weren't decked out in Monarch outfits he remembered. The logo was similar but cruder, and the uniforms were cheaper, dun colored off the rack. Jack unslung his carbine. You want to gift wrap it for them, or are you going to help me here? The guy carrying the gym bag stepped into the sterile room and picked up the countermeasure, barehanded without precaution or ceremony.
Yeah, it's pretty banged up.
Beth tensed, fingers flexing on her gun. With a glance, Jack understood what had to happen. As the guy left the room with his device, Jack and Beth swept from behind cover, weapons level. The woman spotted them, eyes wide with shock. Beth pressed one finger to her lips. The woman screamed. The guy, whose back was turned, leaped, saw the guns, also screaming, and ran. The muzzle of Beth's carbine followed him as he bolted to the door, sweeping across the woman's head as her finger tightened. Jack leaped in, knocked her barrel skywards with the barrel of his own, 3-round burst ringing out.
Beth wheeled on him, furious. "You can't just shoot him," he said. Patience spent, Beth shouldered past the woman out through the security door. Bright sunlight resolved into shapes, and some of those shapes turned out to be men with guns leaning against the four-wheel drive, startled to action by the sound of gunfire. Beth skidded to a halt. 60 feet from them, armed as was an entire team, brought their weapons up. The guy with the gym bag kept running, straight toward them. The Monarch crew were just guys in jeans, shades, and Monarch-branded t-shirts. The runner was in the line of fire. The space around the four-wheel drive snapped and froze, a shimmering dome of stuttered time. From the doorway, Jack said, "Get the countermeasure! I'll take care of these!" She took off after the runner. Past the security team, Jack headed straight for the mini stutter when a gunshot rang out. A cannonball force took him in the torso. He hit the concrete with a disbelieving cough. Before Jack could refill his lungs, Paul Serene was on him. "The machine changed you too. I knew it had." Paul's face was 6 inches from his own. This version of the face he knew so well was a little younger than the bastard who would kill Will in 2016. "You're the second you," Paul said. "Not the one who rode away just now. You're from 2016, which means Will's machine is intact. That was to be how you got here. Where is it?" "It's good to see you too, buddy." You could feel the bruise forming sharply and painfully beneath the Kevlar, then tickling it as it quickly healed and faded. Paul let go of Jack's shirt. Jack noticed that both Paul's hands were pristine, normal, human. No sickness. So that first trip through the machine in 2016 hadn't made him sick. What had? "Good to see you too, Jack. I have so much I need to tell you." The runner had recoiled from the sight of the stutter bubble, encasing the security team, and kept on running. Countermeasure in hand, he pounded for the gap between the warehouses where Beth had parked the car. She didn't like the way that the gym bag was bouncing around in his hand. If the countermeasure cracked open, it'd be game over. "Stop!" she yelled. She raised the carbine's barrel, cracking a warning burst over his head. The runner skidded to a stop. As he threw his hands over his head, the gym bag containing the countermeasure slipped from his fingers. Beth recoiled, shielding her eyes as the bag hit the ground hard. Nothing happened. "Stay down, Jack," Paul said. "This'll be over soon, and then we could talk. This is so weird, man. You won't believe it." Just as suddenly, Paul's weight was off him. Paul folded himself back into a moment, propelling himself across the open ground and past his frozen security team. In a blink, Paul tore the carbine from Beth's hands, flipped it, and jabbed her square in the forehead with the butt of her own weapon. Beth's head snapped back as she went down. Jack heard her cry out and began struggling to his feet, breath burning in his chest. Behind Paul, the security team sprang back to life as Jack's mini-stutter collapsed. Paul marched toward him, hand up, ordering them to hold fire. They were confused, but this would be a key learning experience for them. All in all, this was turning out to be the most beneficial day. Paul addressed the guy with the gym bag, now gratefully relaxing against the hood of Beth's car, parked between the buildings some 50 feet away. "We're done. You're safe now. Is that it? In the bag?" The man was nodding, loose-jointed with relief.
Yes, sir. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Past the security team, closer to Will's workshop, Jack got to his feet. The scene filled itself in, the security team covering him. Beyond them, Paul with Beth's carbine. Beyond Paul, Beth laid out flat, clutching her head. Past her, leaning against the car, the tech. At the tech's feet, the gym bag containing the countermeasure. Paul gestured to the waiting vehicle. "All right, technician. Get yourself to." Like a living thing, the gym bag at the technician's feet leaped off the ground, the bag disintegrating instantly, and all the light in heaven spilled out. The self-replenishing source within the battered countermeasure hosted out a density of chronon particles orders of magnitude greater than the environmental baseline. The technician, engulfed by a roiling, expanding distortion field, was rapidly being invented by a flickering, shifting phage that swept from his center of mass toward the extremities and raced upward toward his mind. Eyes open, terrified and ignorant, he felt all that he was being replaced 1,000 times over. Paul shoulders Beth carbine and shot the doomed tech through the head. The tech's sickness vanished upon death, and he slid into the concrete, fully human. Silhouetted against the crazed, strobing light, Paul let the weapon slip from slapped fingers. Caught within the countermeasure's ongoing blast, the left side of Paul's body already changing. His hand was reskinned by the same iridescent transformation that had claimed the doomed technician. Both terrified and entranced, Paul saw his flesh alternate between versions of itself, and shining facets of the sickness
like shifting windows onto the alternate versions of his own flesh. Nothing constant, always changing, always different. The change crept toward his shoulder, inch by slow inch, accelerating as Paul's cells absorbed more and more of what the countermeasure threw out. The roar of approaching trucks came to them from blocks away, echoing off the closely packed buildings. Monarch backup, responding to the emergency. Jack was on his feet. Beth too. The light was blinding. Beth received the worst of the blast. She had been caught between the tech and Paul, much closer to the epicenter, 20 feet from the countermeasure. She faced Jack, her head silhouetted against the killing light, one transformed eye shining like a dying star. Her teeth, clenched against pain, were backlit. The backup squads arrived as the warehouses and Beth's car met alternate versions of themselves, fading in, fading apart, building up, redesigning, self-defacing, flashing clean. The first security team stood unmoving, trembling, hypnotized by the vision. The slowly expanding radius of the oversaturation showed catalogs of what could have been. The sections of the warehouses caught in the blast were raw brick, then pristine white, then tagged with gang symbols, then gone entirely, then overgrown and abandoned. One second they were made out of corrugated iron, the next they were a parking lot, followed by an outdoor cafe. The car changed models and colors. Sometimes it wasn't the car. Other times it was a Bronco, or gone, or riddled with bullets, or a motorcycle, or a solar-powered three-wheeled covered trike, the likes of which Jack had never seen. The ground itself changed, rioting and fighting with versions of itself. Concrete, blacktop, overgrown, lawn, mud. Brakes were hit as the driver of the first backup truck spotted the anomaly. The three-truck convoy skidding to a halt outside of the oversaturation's radius. Armed men disgorged from the vehicles without order. Nobody advanced. No one wanted to get close. None of them understood what they were seeing. Beth saw Jack. He was running to her. She brought forth both hands. Intersected. T for time out. Think before you act. There was nothing he could do. No! Her throat, the interior of her mouth luminesced, flickered, snapped. Then she turned and walked toward the mad light. Beth! She didn't look back. Her rescue rig sparked and crazed as it shielded her against the madness. Connection shorted out. Spark burst into flame at elbow and shoulder. But it was enough to keep her going, to get her closer to the countermeasure before the change took her completely. Discordant energy arced and flailed from vehicles, brickwork. Men stumbled backwards, scrambling like scalded cats from flickering arms of violet energy, and leapt and bounced from one surface to another. The space between the warehouses had become a storm, a force Beth had to push against, and through. It cost her to do it, as every cell in her body was forcefully introduced to its countless others. Her brain revolted. She understood in moments what it was like to be 1,000 people all at once. 1,000 simultaneous versions of herself. She saw infinite lives running parallel to each other, infinite futures in life branching away from that moment. She held herself together in this life to finish what she had come here to do, to retrieve the countermeasure intact. She had given too much, lived too long to be swept away by a torrent of potential and chaos before she had sung her final note. She crouched before that fount of mad energy and plunged her flickering, shifting hands she didn't recognize, into the roiling light. The countermeasure was in there, a thrashing, discordant sun. It plunged tendrils into her body and mind, showing her infinite possibilities, distracting her from the most important of all tasks, unmaking her capacity to be singular, introducing to her flavors of agony few people have ever known. Her rescue rig shorted out completely. Her hair caught fire, a corona around her head. Sliding and fumbling across the surface of the countermeasure, she was able to locate the damaged access panel. Using hands that were in the process of ceaseless reinvention, faster than what she could process the changes, and with what remained of her strength and control, she forced the tiny hatch back into place, hoping against hope it would be enough. It was. The blinding glare vanished as Beth toppled to her side. The hot, heavy weight of the countermeasure clutched to her chest. "Beth!" Jack vaulted forward. The nearest security specialist fired his taser. Jack tensed and dropped like a side of beef. Beth lay on her back, blue morning sky broken and rung-colored in the new, changed starlight eye. So many versions of her wanted to be known inside of a singular body. So many lives. An infinity of other nows and heres. Lives where she had Jack walked away from this. Where this had never happened. Men gathered, carefully, nervously at the corner of her vision. She saw the surviving technician reach down to take the countermeasure from her. Eyes full of fear and misery. She heard Paul howl. He staggered into view above her, all messed up, his arm in the side of the body, a flashing fractal mess. An aftershock pulsed. The world reinvented shockingly as something else. Something alien, just for a moment, returned to normal. The technician took her prize and ran toward the waiting security team. The countermeasure was gone, and with it, any hope of repairing the MJ field. One of the security team ventured to speak.
"Sir, we should get you to a doctor immediately."
Paul ignored him, fell to his knees, got in her face, screamed again. Beth smiled, her teeth backlit, her left eye going nova.
"Oh, boy,"
she said with many, many soft voices.
"Not yet been running with you."
She unzipped her jacket, with a string ping snap sound, throwing Paul what she had carried beneath, found 1-pound bars of C4 wrapped in Gorilla Tape, attached by 9 inches of rubberized fuse to an M60 igniter.
"This is just the load screen."
The fuse popped and hissed, throwing smoke in Paul's eyes. So many futures ran to meet Beth. So many possibilities revealed themselves to her starlight eye. So many Jacks. Jack ordered misfiring limits into action, hauled himself off the ground. One of the security grunts had tasered him in the front of the vehicle, and Beth was too far away to reach. His heart died the moment he realized he had failed her again. Paul leaped back, folded into a moment, and fled. His men were less fortunate. One future in particular shone brightest, clearest. Beth whipped her head to look at Jack one last time.
"In trouble? Trust the villain."
The first rule of a good disappearance: leave nothing behind.
"Beth!"
Supernova. The C4 kicked off. The 3 men gathered about her had no chance. The corners of both warehouses blew inward, top levels collapsing into lower. Beth's car bucked upward, the hood blown off, tires blown out, a ton of brickwork sloughing down to both sides. Every window for a block blew out. The soldiers milling about 30 feet went blind, deaf, and were blown off their feet. The technician, running for the 3rd unit, tumbled to the ground, clutching the countermeasure, and then got up and kept running. Debris rained down for 2 blocks. Somewhere in the docklands, a car alarm started wailing. The air was choked with atomized dust and brickwork. Jack lowered his arm from his face, his ears ringing. Beth was gone. The men who had gathered around her were gone. The 2nd unit were laid out, 2 of them clutching their heads and screaming, eyes destroyed, eardrums burst. The remaining 3 were motionless. The 3rd unit had fled for the cover of their vehicles, sheltering behind the window-smashed truck. Clouds of dark orange haze rolled across the scene, obscuring and revealing. Here, men screamed, then they were gone. The bricks tumbled from the smashed face of the warehouse, and were taken away. No sound save the ringing in Jack's ears. A dust curtain breathed aside, and there stood Paul Serene. Some 50 feet away, his arm a shifting, sliding starlight mess. His face fixed in the cough red-handed little boy expression of, "What have I done?" The clouds froze. Jack and Paul looked at each other. Fate,
afforded them privacy in this final moment. Jack raised his handgun, took his time, centering the sights on Paul's head. Paul didn't move, didn't fight it. Jack's hand was as unsteady as it had ever been, muscles and nerves gone slack from shock. He could barely keep the gun raised. After a few seconds, he couldn't. Paul seemed almost disappointed. In one move, the gun came up, level and braced. On the other side of the iron sights, Paul's expression melted into one of mortal fear. He had no time to escape. 15 feet behind Jack, 1,000 roars and screams folded into one. It should have been bass enough to rattle Jack's ribs, shrill enough to pain his ears, but the only place it resonated was within his mind. He turned to face the source of the discord and saw a thing that surely represented the final stage of Paul's sickness. Humanoid, with uncertain profile. A stumbling, heavy-set sketch of flashing, fractal insanity. It moved toward Jack, raising one arm as it did, so to reveal the well of starlight in its palm, crowned by a row of fingers, sharp and phasing. So this is where it ended then. But he wasn't letting Paul off the hook. Jack decided to take one last shot at changing the past. He wheeled around, raised his pistol, centered it on Paul's head, and the creature's palm swept it from Jack's left and took him by the face.